A man worth billions, whose voice could make stock markets tremble, pointed a manicured finger at a waitress. In the most exclusive restaurant in New York, surrounded by the city's elite, he unleashed a tirade of complex corporate jargon, a verbal assault designed to humiliate and crush her spirit. He called her a non-performing asset, a wasted investment, a net loss. The silence was deafening, but Damian Blackwood had made a catastrophic miscalculation. He assumed the simple black apron defined the brilliant mind beneath. He expected tears. Instead, she took a breath and responded fluently in his own language of power, dismantling not just his argument, but the very foundation of the billion-dollar deal he was about to sign. The clinking of silverware against fine china was the ambient music of Aurelia, a restaurant so exclusive it didn't have a sign. Tucked away in a quiet Manhattan street, its patrons were the architects of the modern world, tech moguls, finance titans, and old money aristocrats. To work here was to be invisible, a silent cog in a machine that catered to the whims of the gods of capital. For Amelia Hayes it was a gilded cage, and the irony was almost too much to bear. Just 2 years ago, she had been one of them. Not a patron, but a player. Amelia, a prodigy, with a mind for numbers that seemed almost supernatural, had graduated from Wharton at 20, and by 24 was one of the most feared analysts on Wall Street. She could see patterns in market data, the way a composer sees a symphony in scattered notes. She was a rising star, the vice president of a boutique investment firm on the verge of making partner. Then it had all come crashing down in a storm of betrayal and fabricated accusations that left her career in ruins and her name blacklisted across the financial world. Now at 26, she wore a pristine black apron over a simple dress, her once confident stride replaced by a measured, unobtrusive glide between tables. Her sharp, analytical eyes, which once dissected quarterly earnings reports, now scanned for empty water glasses and discreetly signaled for a check. She was paying off the crushing legal fees, and more importantly, the mounting medical bills for her mother, whose rare neurological condition required experimental treatments not covered by any insurance. The shame was a constant bitter taste in her mouth, but her mother's well-being was the only bottom line that mattered anymore. Her manager, a perpetually stressed man named Gerald, saw her as efficient but distant. "Amelia, Table 7 is Damian Blackwood," he'd whispered at the start of her shift, his voice tight with anxiety. "Do not make a single mistake. The man could buy this building with the change in his pocket and turn it into a private gym if he's displeased." Amelia knew the name. Who didn't? Damian Blackwood, the CEO of Sterling Industries, was a corporate raider with a reputation for being as brilliant as he was ruthless. He was a shark who smelled blood from miles away, a man who saw businesses not as collections of people, but as assets to be stripped and sold. He was everything she had once aspired to be, and everything she now despised. As she approached Table 7, she saw him. He was in his late 30s with sharp, predatory features, impeccably tailored in a dark suit that probably cost more than her mother's last round of treatments. He was dining with an older Asian man whose serene expression was a stark contrast to Blackwood's coiled intensity. Documents were spread between them, and Blackwood's voice was a low, urgent growl. He wasn't eating, he was conquering. Amelia waited patiently, her face a mask of professional neutrality. The conversation was dense, filled with acronyms and financial jargon that was as familiar to her as her own name. They were discussing a hostile takeover, a big one. The target was a legacy tech firm, Innovate Dynamics. Blackwood was dissecting their vulnerabilities, planning his attack with military precision. Amelia felt a ghost of her former self stir within her. She could see the flaw in his approach, a subtle miscalculation in the valuation of Innovate's intellectual property portfolio. It was a blind spot, one that a clever defense could exploit. She pushed the thought away. That life was over. She was a waitress. Her job was to pour the water. The tension at table 7 was thick enough to be cut with a steak knife. Damien Blackwood was not a man who enjoyed complications, and his guest, Mr. Kenji Tanaka of Tanaka Corp., was proving to be a formidable negotiator. The deal on the table was a multi-billion-dollar merger, a strategic alliance that would give Sterling Industries an unshakable foothold in the Asian market. But Tanaka was meticulous, questioning every projection, every synergy claim. Damien's patience, a notoriously finite resource, was wearing thin. The Q3 projections for the semiconductor division seem optimistic, Mr. Tanaka noted, calmly pointing a slender finger at a chart. They're aggressive. Kenji, not optimistic. Aggression is how you win. Damien retorted, his voice tight. He gestured dismissively. The risk is factored into the EBITDA multiples. It's standard. It wasn't standard. It was reckless. From her position a few feet away, Amelia recognized the strategy. Blackwood was inflating future earnings to justify a higher valuation for his own company in the merger. It was a house of cards. If those projections weren't met, the fallout would be catastrophic for Tanaka Corp. It was at that precise moment that Amelia moved to refill their water glasses. She was silent, graceful, a phantom in the periphery. But as she reached for Damien's glass, his arm shot out, gesturing emphatically to make a point to Mr. Tanaka. The back of his hand connected squarely with her wrist. The crystal glass tumbled from her hand, not onto the plush carpet, but directly onto the stack of sensitive financial documents spread across the table. Water, cold and clear, bloomed across the ink, blurring the numbers and clauses into an indecipherable mess. The silence that followed was absolute. Mr. Tanaka looked up, his calm expression finally broken by a flicker of surprise. Every diner within earshot turned to look. Damien Blackwood stared at the ruined documents, his face turning a dark, dangerous shade of red. He slowly lifted his gaze from the soggy papers to Amelia, and the look in his eyes was one of pure, unadulterated fury. He didn't see a person. He saw a malfunction, a glitch in the system that had just cost him momentum and face. "You," he began, his voice deceptively low. "Do you have any idea what you've just done?" Before Amelia could stammer an apology, he erupted. It wasn't just yelling. It was a calculated verbal evisceration. He didn't use simple insults. He used the language of his world, twisting the terms of finance into weapons of personal destruction. Are you completely devoid of situational awareness? You are a non-performing asset in a service-based ecosystem. He snarled, his voice rising with each word. The entire restaurant was now watching the unfolding drama. Your entire function can be measured by a single metric: efficiency, and you have just demonstrated a catastrophic failure. You are a net loss, a walking, talking liability. He stood up, pointing a trembling finger at her. I'm sitting here trying to close a deal that has global implications, and you, with your zero ROI existence, managed to literally liquidate the paperwork. In my world, when an investment performs this poorly, we write it off. We cut our losses. We remove it from the portfolio so it can't drag down the profitable assets. He leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a venomous whisper that carried across the hushed room. You are fired. Get out. Your contribution here is negative. You are a rounding error, and you've just been rounded down to 0. Amelia stood frozen, the blood draining from her face. It wasn't just the humiliation. It was the words he used. They were the same terms her former mentor, Julian Vance, had used in the press releases that had destroyed her career. A rogue analyst whose reckless strategies made her a liability to the firm. The wound, which had never truly healed, was torn open anew. For a moment, she felt the familiar sting of tears, the cold dread of powerlessness. But then something else rose in its place. A cold, hard anger. He hadn't just spilled water on her. He had poured salt on the deepest wound of her life. He had no idea who he was talking to. The air in Aurelia was thick with shocked silence. Patrons held their breath forks hovering over their plates. Gerald the manager was scurrying over his face, pale with horror, ready to drag Amelia away and offer a grovelling apology. But Damien Blackwood wasn't finished. He looked at Mr. Tanaka, a sneer twisting his lips. "My apologies, Kenji. It seems we have an unacceptable level of operational drag here. A clear failure in human capital management." He had made his point. He had asserted his dominance, using a waitress as a prop to display his power. He expected her to crumble, to cry, to flee in shame. Amelia did none of those things. She closed her eyes for a single fleeting second. In that darkness, the frightened waitress vanished, and the Wall Street prodigy, the woman who could command a boardroom with a whisper, took her place. She opened her eyes. The fear was gone, replaced by an icy calm that was far more intimidating than Damien's hot rage. She looked not at him, but at the serene Mr. Tanaka. "Mr. Tanaka," she said, her voice clear and steady, devoid of any tremor. It was not the voice of a waitress. It was the voice of a CEO. "My sincerest apologies for the interruption and the damage to the documents. It was clumsy and inexcusable." She then turned her gaze to Damien Blackwood, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. "However, Mr. Blackwood," she continued, her tone shifting, becoming sharp and analytical, "while my operational efficiency may be momentarily compromised, I couldn't help but notice that the strategic architecture of your proposed merger is fundamentally flawed. Calling me a net loss is ironic, given that you're about to absorb one that will hemorrhage capital for at least 6 fiscal quarters." Damien's jaw literally dropped. Mr. Tanaka's eyebrows shot up into his hairline. Amelia gestured with her chin toward the ruined papers. "You're using a trailing PE ratio to value Innovate Dynamics, but you're completely ignoring the goodwill impairment they'll be forced to write down post-acquisition. Their entire patent portfolio for the Odyssey platform is about to be challenged by a consortium of European competitors. That's public knowledge, if you read beyond the headlines." She took a step closer, her voice lowering slightly, drawing them into her orbit. "Furthermore, your synergy projections are based on consolidating R&D departments. But Innovate's value isn't in its current product line. It's in its Skunk Works division, a team you'd likely dissolve, effectively paying billions for a company and then immediately discarding its most valuable asset. You're not buying a house, you're paying for a diamond mine and then filling it with cement." She paused, letting her words hang in the air like daggers. "You speak of rounding errors. So your valuation of Innovate Dynamics is off by a factor of at least 20%. That's not a rounding error. In this deal, that's a 9-figure miscalculation. You're leveraging Sterling Industries to the hilt for an acquisition that looks good on paper, but is a Trojan horse filled with legacy debt and imminent litigation." She finished her gaze, unwavering. "So by all means, fire me. But I recommend you take a fraction of the time you just spent verbally dissecting my worth and apply it to the due diligence of the deal you're about to stake your company's future on. Because from where I'm standing, this restaurant isn't the only thing with an unacceptable level of operational drag." The silence that followed was no longer shocked. It was thunderous. Damien Blackwood stood utterly speechless, his face a mask of disbelief. He had been verbally disarmed, dissected, and defeated by a waitress. And the most terrifying part, He knew with a sickening certainty that chilled him to the bone that she was absolutely right. Gerald, the manager, finally reached the table, his face a frantic mess of apology. "Mr. Blackwood, I am so sorry. This is unacceptable, Amelia. You're fired. Get your things and—" "Quiet!" Damien snapped, his voice a low growl. He didn't even look at Gerald, his eyes wide with a mixture of fury, awe and utter confusion were locked on Amelia. The patrons around them were no longer pretending not to listen. They were captivated, witnessing a scene more dramatic than any Broadway play. Mr. Tanaka broke the spell. He let out a slow, deliberate breath and looked at Amelia with a newfound, profound respect. "Young lady," he said, his voice calm but laced with immense curiosity, "you seem to possess a remarkably nuanced understanding of corporate valuation." Amelia's composure finally began to fray at the edges. The adrenaline that had fueled her counterattack was fading, replaced by the terrifying realization of what she had just done. She had talked back to Damien Blackwood. She had publicly humiliated one of the most powerful men in the city. Her mother's medical bills flashed in her mind. This job, as demeaning as it was her lifeline. I spoke out of turn. "Please excuse me," she murmured, her gaze dropping to the floor. She turned to leave, her only thought to escape, before the consequences of her actions came crashing down on her. "Stop," Damien commanded. His voice had lost its rage, replaced by a steely, inquisitive authority. "You're not going anywhere. Who are you?" Amelia froze her back to him. "I'm a waitress," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "No," Damien said, walking around the table to stand in front of her, forcing her to meet his gaze. "No waitress on earth talks about goodwill impairment and skunkworks divisions. I've had Ivy League MBAs in my boardroom who aren't that sharp. I'll ask you one more time. Who are you?" Amelia looked into his eyes, and for the first time she saw past the arrogant billionaire. She saw a flicker of something else, a brilliant mind recognizing another. But she couldn't afford to engage. Her past was a minefield. Her name, Hayes, was poison in the financial world. "My shift is over," she said, her voice regaining a sliver of its firmness. She sidestepped him and walked away, her head held high, even as her heart hammered against her ribs. She didn't look back. She could feel the weight of every eye in the restaurant on her, but most of all, she could feel the intense, burning stare of Damien Blackwood. He watched her go, a storm of emotions warring within him. He had been challenged and exposed in a way he never had before. His ego was bruised, but his intellect was electrified. The flaw she had pointed out. He had a sudden gut-wrenching feeling that she was right. His team had assured him the Innovate deal was airtight, a guaranteed win. Had his ambition blinded him to a critical weakness? "Find out who she is," Damien said quietly to the air, pulling out his phone. He wasn't speaking to Mr. Tanaka or the terrified manager. He was speaking to his head of security, a man named Peterson, who could find a ghost if he had to. "Peterson," he said into the phone, his voice low and urgent. "I'm at Aurelia. There's a waitress here. Her name is Amelia. I want to know everything about her. Her education, her work history, where she lives, what she had for breakfast. Everything. I want a full dossier on my desk by morning. Spare no expense." As Amelia pushed through the kitchen doors, stripping off her apron, she was just Amelia Hayes, a fired waitress, heading home to a tiny apartment and a mountain of worries. But out in the dining room, a manhunt of a different kind had just begun. Damien Blackwood was no longer interested in firing a waitress. He was interested in acquiring an asset, and he always got what he wanted. The next morning, Damien Blackwood sat in his penthouse office, a glass-walled sanctuary overlooking Central Park. The sun was rising, casting long shadows across the city, but Damien hadn't slept. He had spent the night dissecting the Innovate deal, running the numbers himself, his best analysts working furiously in the adjoining conference room. The more he dug, the more a cold dread settled in his stomach. The Waitress had been right. His team had missed the pending European litigation against the Odyssey platform's patents. It was buried in a dense legal filing, obscure but public. If the challenge was successful, Innovate's projected value would plummet by hundreds of millions of dollars overnight. He had been minutes away from signing a deal that would have left him dangerously over-leveraged for a hollowed-out company. The woman in the black apron hadn't just embarrassed him. She had saved him from a potential catastrophe. At precisely 7:00 a.m., his assistant placed a slim, unmarked folder on his mahogany desk. "From Mr. Peterson, sir." Damien opened it. The file was titled Hayes Amelia. The first page was a photo, a candid shot of her leaving the restaurant the night before. She looked tired, burdened, a world away from the confident warrior who had verbally dismantled him. He turned the page. The details were stark. Education, University of Pennsylvania, the Wharton School. B.S. in Economics, summa cum laude. Graduated in 3 years. Work history, Goldman Sachs analyst, 2 years. Vance Capital, vice president. 2 years. Termination abrupt, followed by a public scandal. The dossier included scanned newspaper clippings. The headline screamed at him, "Whiz Kids Gamble Costs, Vance Capital, 500 $. Rogue trader, Amelia Hayes, blacklisted from Wall Street." The articles painted a picture of a young, arrogant analyst whose hubris had led to a massive financial loss, forcing her mentor and CEO, the celebrated Julian Vance, to fire her and publicly denounce her actions to save his firm. Damien leaned back, a low whistle escaping his lips. Amelia Hayes. He remembered the scandal. It had been the talk of the street for months. Hayes had been made an example of a pariah. No firm would touch her. But the official story didn't align with the woman he'd met. The woman who had, in under 60 seconds, identified a fatal flaw in his own meticulously crafted deal was not reckless. She was precise, brilliant, and disciplined. Something wasn't right. Peterson's team had dug deeper. The file contained transcripts of legal depositions, internal emails from Vance Capital that had been leaked, and a financial audit of the disastrous trade. Damien read through them, his eyes narrowing. A pattern began to emerge. The trade Amelia had supposedly initiated was one she had argued against vehemently in emails to Julian Vance. She had warned him it was too risky, that the underlying assets were unstable. Vance had overruled her, pushed the trade through himself, under her credentials, and when it imploded, he had used her as a scapegoat. The evidence was all there, circumstantial, but overwhelming. He had fed his brilliant protégé to the wolves to cover his own catastrophic mistake. The final page of the dossier was the most revealing. It detailed her current life. A 1-bedroom apartment in Queens, no savings, no assets, and a detailed breakdown of payments to the St. Jude's Neurological Center. The bills were staggering. The diagnosis was for her mother, Eleanor Hayes. Damien closed the folder, a profound and unfamiliar emotion settling over him. It was a complex cocktail of respect, anger, and something akin to guilt. He had verbally assaulted a woman who had already been through hell, a woman who was working a menial job, not because she was a net loss, but to save her mother's life. A woman whose brilliant career had been stolen from her. He looked out at the city, at the countless windows, representing millions of lives. In one of them was the most brilliant financial mind he had ever encountered, and she was probably terrified she wouldn't be able to make rent. "Get the car," he said into his intercom. his voice quiet but resolute. I know where we're going. He was no longer just acquiring an asset. He was going to correct a gross injustice. And in doing so, he would forge the most powerful weapon his company had ever known. Amelia's apartment building was a nondescript brick structure in Astoria, Queens, a world away from the glittering spires of Manhattan. The lobby smelled faintly of bleach and boiled cabbage. When the knock came at her door, Amelia's first thought was that it was the landlord coming to complain about her being a day late with the rent check. She had been fired after all. The thought sent a fresh wave of panic through her. She opened the door a crack and her heart stopped. Standing in the narrow, dimly lit hallway was Damien Blackwood. He wasn't flanked by security or assistants. He was alone, dressed not in a power suit, but in dark trousers and a simple, expensive-looking cashmere sweater. He looked profoundly out of place, a hawk in a sparrow's nest. "Miss Hayes," he said, his voice softer than she'd ever heard it. "May I come in?" Speechless, Amelia could only nod, opening the door wider. He stepped inside his large frame, seeming to shrink the tiny living room. The space was sparse but immaculate. A worn sofa, a small table with 2 chairs and a bookshelf overflowing with texts on economics and market theory. On a small end table was a framed photo of a smiling, healthy-looking woman, her mother before the illness. On the coffee table lay a stack of medical bills. Damien's eyes took it all in, his expression unreadable. He saw not poverty, but dignity in the face of hardship. "I imagine you're wondering why I'm here," he began, turning to face her. "First, I want to apologize. My behavior at the restaurant was inexcusable. There is no justification for the way I spoke to you." The apology was so direct, so devoid of corporate spin, that it left Amelia momentarily stunned. "Thank you," she managed to say. "Second," he continued, his gaze becoming intense. "I am here to offer you a job." Amelia let out a short, bitter laugh. "A job you fired me from a waitressing position less than 12 hours ago. Are you looking for a new head of water pouring at Sterling Industries?" "I'm looking for a new head of strategy," Damien said, his voice dead serious. "I spent all night reviewing the Innovate deal. You were right, about every single detail. You saved my company from a 9-figure mistake, possibly more." He took a step closer. "I also spent the night learning about you, Amelia. I know about Wharton. I know about Vance Capital. And I know what Julian Vance did to you." Amelia flinched as if he'd struck her. Her past was a private, painful shame. To have him lay it bare in her own living room felt like a violation. "You had me investigated." "I did," he admitted without hesitation. "I had to understand how a mind like yours ended up at Aurelia. What I found was a criminal injustice. He made you a scapegoat to cover his own incompetence." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. "I'm not just offering you a job, Amelia. I'm offering you a chance to take back what was stolen from you. I want you to work for me. Not as an analyst in a cubicle, but as my personal advisor. Your office will be next to mine. You'll have final say on all major acquisitions. I won't make a move without your approval." He named a salary that made Amelia's head spin, a figure so astronomical it seemed like a dream. But it was the next part of his offer that shattered her defenses. "Your mother's medical care," he said softly, gesturing toward the bills on the table. "Sterling Industries' corporate health plan is the best in the world. It will cover everything. The best doctors, the best treatments, no questions asked. She will want for nothing." Tears pricked at Amelia's eyes. It was everything she wanted. A way out of this nightmare security for her mother, a return to the work she was born to do. But the scar tissue from Julian Vance's betrayal was thick. Trusting a man like Damien Blackwood felt like volunteering to be struck by lightning twice. "Why?" she asked, her voice thick with suspicion. "Why me? You could hire any analyst in the world." "Because none of them are you," Damien said simply. "None of them have your clarity, and none of them have the courage to stand up to a man like me and tell me I'm wrong. I don't need sycophants, Amelia. I have plenty of those. I need a partner. I need someone who sees the blind spots. I need you." He could see the war in her eyes. "I know I'm asking you to trust me," he said, "and I know I haven't given you any reason to. So don't trust me. Trust yourself. You know you're better than this. This isn't just a job offer. It's a restoration. Come work for me, and together we'll not only build an empire, we will burn down the one who wronged you." The last sentence hung in the air. It wasn't just a promise of a career. It was a promise of vengeance. And for Amelia, who had spent 2 years swallowing her rage, it was an offer she couldn't possibly refuse. Amelia's first day at Sterling Industries was a surreal experience. She walked through the gleaming marble lobby, not in a waitress uniform, but in a tailored suit she'd bought that morning, with an advance Damien had wired to her account. The employees who bustled past her stole curious glances, whispering amongst themselves. Who was this woman who had appeared out of nowhere and was being personally escorted by Damien Blackwood to the executive floor? Her office was breathtaking. It was adjacent to Damien's, separated by a pane of smart glass that could be turned from transparent to opaque with the flick of a switch. It had the same panoramic view of the city he did. On the desk was a state-of-the-art computer and a simple handwritten note from Damien. "Welcome back to the game." The first week was a whirlwind. Damien immersed her in every facet of his empire, from tech startups and real estate holdings to complex international trade agreements. He held nothing back. He gave her complete access to his company's financials, its strategies, its vulnerabilities. It was a staggering display of trust, and it did more to win her over than any salary could. She in turn proved her worth within hours. She streamlined their European logistics chain, identifying inefficiencies that would save them $50 million a year. She restructured a failing subsidiary, turning it from a liability into a profitable asset in 3 days. She was a force of nature, and Damien watched fascinated as the brilliant mind he'd witnessed in the restaurant was unleashed upon his corporation. The dynamic between them shifted. He was still the boss, the titan of industry, but she was no longer an employee. She was his confidant, his strategist, his equal in intellect. Their days were filled with intense debates, their arguments echoing through the executive suite as they challenged each other's assumptions and honed their plans. A grudging respect grew between them, forged in the fires of high-stakes business. One evening they were working late, poring over a new potential acquisition, a clean energy company called Solara. "It's a solid company," Damien said, pointing at a projection. "Good tech, strong market position. We can acquire them for a fair price." "No," Amelia said, shaking her head. "It's a trap." "A trap, Amelia. The numbers are perfect." "The numbers are too perfect," she countered, pulling up a different set of files. "Look at their parent company, Goliath Capital. They're a venture capital firm known for pumping up their assets right before a sale. It's a classic pump and dump, just on a corporate scale. They're hiding debt in off-balance sheet entities. We buy Solara, and 6 months later, that hidden debt will surface and cripple the company." Damien stared at the data she had unearthed, information his own top-tier M&A team had missed. "How did you find this?" "I know how they think," Amelia said, her voice turning cold. This has all the hallmarks of a specific kind of predator. Just then, an encrypted email arrived on Damien's computer. It was from his contact at Tanaka Corp. The Innovate deal had officially collapsed after Mr. Tanaka conducted his own deeper due diligence, confirming Amelia's warnings. But the email contained a more interesting piece of information. From Kenji Tanaka, subject Goliath Capital, Damien, be cautious in your dealings with Goliath. Their new lead advisor on the Solara project is a man with a reputation for this kind of aggressive, deceptive strategy. I thought the name might be familiar to you. It's Julian Vance. Damien read the name, and his blood ran cold. He looked up at Amelia, whose face had gone pale. She had seen the name on the screen. Julian Vance, the architect of her downfall, the man who had stolen her life. It all clicked into place. This wasn't a random acquisition target. Solara wasn't just another deal. It was a carefully constructed trap, and Julian Vance had laid it specifically for Damien Blackwood. But he had made one fatal error. He had no idea that the weapon he had tried to destroy 2 years ago was now sitting in his opponent's war room. "He's coming after you," Amelia whispered, her eyes wide, with a mixture of horror and a dawning, terrible resolve. "No," Damien said, a slow, dangerous smile spreading across his face as he looked at her. "He's coming after us, and he has no idea the war he just started." The stakes had just become deeply, irrevocably personal. The main boardroom of Goliath Capital was designed to intimidate. A long black marble table sat under a single dramatic spotlight, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a dizzying view of the city below. On one side sat the board of Goliath, led by their CEO, a ruthless man named Alistair Finch. Beside him, looking smug and supremely confident, was Julian Vance. On the other side sat Damien Blackwood, and next to him Amelia Hayes. This was the final negotiation for the Solara acquisition. After Amelia had uncovered his initial trap, Julian had pivoted. He had restructured the deal, seemingly addressing all of her concerns, cleaning up the balance sheets, and presenting a new transparent offer. It was a masterpiece of corporate maneuvering, and any other company would have signed immediately. But Amelia knew Julian. He didn't play fair. There was another trap, hidden somewhere, a venomous snake, coiled in the fine print. "As you can see, Mr. Blackwood." Julian began, his voice smooth and condescending. "We have addressed every single one of your firm's unusual concerns. The offer is clean. The company is sound. It's a turnkey acquisition that will make Sterling the leader in the green energy sector." He pointedly avoided looking at Amelia, as if she were nothing more than a piece of furniture. Damien remained silent, deferring to Amelia with a subtle nod. This was her battlefield. Amelia leaned forward, her hands clasped calmly on the table. "It's an impressive presentation, Julian. Truly. The way you've shuffled the debt into a newly created subsidiary based in the Cayman Islands is particularly clever. Very creative accounting." A flicker of surprise crossed Julian's face. Alistair Finch shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "It's a standard practice for managing international assets." Julian countered, his smoothness beginning to fray. "Is it also standard practice?" Amelia continued, her voice like ice, "to base the company's entire valuation on a single, exclusive government contract to provide energy to the state of California? That contract is the cornerstone of their value," Finch interjected. "It's ironclad. A 20-year term." "It is," Amelia agreed, "and I'm sure it was very expensive to secure." She slid a thin folder across the marble table towards them. "So expensive, in fact, that you had to bribe State Senator Robert Morrison to get it pushed through committee. A bribe paid from the very same Cayman Islands subsidiary you just created." The color drained from Julian's and Finch's faces. The boardroom fell into a stunned silence. Amelia pressed her attack. Inside that folder you'll find copies of wire transfers from your subsidiary to a shell corporation owned by the senator's brother-in-law. You'll also find a sworn affidavit from a former employee in your accounting department who was uncomfortable with the creative way you were hiding the payments. She stood up, her small frame radiating an immense, unshakable power. You see, Julian, you taught me everything I know about finding financial skeletons. You just never thought I'd come looking in your closet. The California contract isn't ironclad, it's void. As soon as this information is handed over to the SEC and the Department of Justice, which it will be the second we walk out of this room, that contract will evaporate. And with it, Solara's value. The company will be bankrupt within a month. She looked directly at Julian, all the pain and betrayal of the past 2 years fueling her final devastating blow. You tried to sell us a Trojan horse, just like last time. But you forgot something. I was the one who built it with you. I know all its secret passages. Julian Vance stared at her, his face a mask of pure hatred and disbelief. He was utterly, completely ruined. He had walked into the room a master of the universe and would walk out a common criminal. Amelia picked up her briefcase. The offer, gentlemen, is rejected. She and Damien turned and walked out of the boardroom, leaving behind the wreckage of 2 men's careers and a billion-dollar company in flames. In the hallway, Damien stopped and looked at her. His eyes filled with an emotion she had never seen in him before, pure, unadulterated admiration. Restoration, he said quietly. Amelia allowed herself a small, triumphant smile. And then some, she replied. The fallout from the Goliath Capital meeting was immediate and spectacular. News of the bribery scandal exploded across the financial world. The SEC launched a full-scale investigation, federal agents raided Goliath's offices, and Senator Morrison resigned in disgrace. Alistair Finch was fired by his board, and Julian Vance, the architect of the scheme, was arrested. His face, once a regular feature on financial news networks, was now a grim mugshot splashed across every major newspaper. His career wasn't just over, it was incinerated. For Amelia, watching the news reports felt like waking from a long, suffocating nightmare. The man who had haunted her for 2 years, the ghost who had stolen her name and her future, was finally facing justice. The weight she had carried for so long finally lifted, leaving her feeling lighter than she had in years. A week later, Damien called a special meeting of the Sterling Industries Executive Board. They gathered in the main boardroom, the same powerful men and women who had whispered about Amelia when she first arrived. They now looked at her with a mixture of awe and healthy fear. They all knew she was the one who had single-handedly saved the company from the Innovate disaster, and then brought down a major competitor. Damien stood at the head of the table. As you all know, he began, our company has navigated some treacherous waters recently. We have avoided a catastrophic acquisition and solidified our market position thanks almost entirely to the strategic foresight of one person. He turned to Amelia. When I hired Amelia Hayes, I offered her a position as my advisor. It has become clear in a very short time that this title is inadequate. Her contributions have gone beyond advice. They have fundamentally reshaped the future of this corporation. He picked up a heavy, leather-bound portfolio from the table. Therefore, effective immediately, I am dissolving the position of strategic advisor. Instead, the board has unanimously approved the creation of a new role. He slid the portfolio in front of Amelia. She opened it. Inside was a single document. Her eyes scanned the text, her breath catching in her throat. I am promoting you to Chief Strategy Officer of Sterling Industries, Damien announced to the room. Furthermore, as a signing bonus and in recognition of your invaluable contributions, the board has awarded you a 5% equity stake in the company. The room erupted in applause. 5%. It was a figure that instantly made her one of the wealthiest women in the country. It was more than money. It was power, security, and ownership. It was the ultimate validation. Amelia looked up at Damien, her eyes shining with unshed tears. I don't know what to say. Say you accept, Damien said, a rare, genuine smile on his face. I accept, she whispered. Later that day, Amelia was in her office when her new assistant buzzed. Ms. Hayes, there's a call for you. It's from the St. Jude's Neurological Center, a Dr. Orris. Amelia's heart leapt into her throat. She snatched the phone. Doctor, Eris, is everything okay? Everything is more than okay, Mrs. Hayes, the doctor's warm voice replied. The new treatment regimen, the one your new insurance approved. We've just gotten the results from your mother's latest scans. The lesion, it's shrinking. Her motor skills are already improving. The prognosis is... It's remarkable, Amelia, truly remarkable. Amelia sank into her chair, the phone pressed to her ear, and for the first time in 2 long years, she wept. But these were not tears of sorrow or despair. They were tears of profound, overwhelming joy. Her mother was getting better. Her name was cleared. Her future was brighter than she had ever dared to imagine. She had faced down the monster from her past, and won. She had not only reclaimed her life, she had built a better one on the ruins of the old. 6 months passed. The name Amelia Hayes was no longer a cautionary tale whispered on Wall Street. It was a legend. As Chief Strategy Officer, she had guided Sterling Industries with a steady, brilliant hand. She had spearheaded a new division focused on ethical and sustainable investments, proving that profitability and integrity could go hand in hand. The division was already outperforming every other sector of the company. She wasn't just playing the game anymore. She was changing the rules. One afternoon, she stood with Damien on the construction site of the new Eleanor Hayes wing of the St. Jude's Neurological Center, a project funded by a massive anonymous donation she and Damien had made. Her mother, now walking with only a slight limp, was meeting with doctors inside her laughter, echoing faintly through the open doorway. You know, Damien said, watching the construction workers, I keep thinking about that night at Aurelia. Amelia smiled, trying to forget the time a waitress verbally dismantled your ego in front of your biggest international partner. He chuckled a deep, genuine sound. No, I was thinking about what a fool I was. I looked at you, and I saw an apron. I saw a non-performing asset. I was so blinded by my own arrogance, I almost missed the most valuable discovery of my entire life. He turned to her, his expression serious. You didn't just save my company, Amelia. You made it better. You made me better. Their partnership had evolved into a deep, powerful friendship, built on mutual respect. They were a perfectly balanced team, his ruthless ambition tempered by her strategic caution, her brilliant mind amplified by his immense resources. As they stood there, a sleek black car pulled up. A man got out looking nervous and overdressed for a construction site. It was Gerald, the former manager of Aurelia. The restaurant had gone under new management, and he was looking for a job. He had somehow secured a meeting with Damien, not realizing who he would find standing beside him. Gerald's face went white when he saw Amelia. Ms. Hayes, he stammered. I had no idea. Amelia gave him a calm, measured look. The man who had been so quick to throw her away was now standing before her, effectively asking for a lifeline. The old Amelia might have felt a flash of vengeful satisfaction, but the woman she was now felt only a quiet sense of closure. "Gerald," she said, her voice gentle but firm, "send your resume to our HR department. They will give it the same consideration they give every other applicant." She then turned back to Damien, the conversation as far as she was concerned over. She had no time for the ghosts of her past. She was too busy building the future. She looked from the rising hospital wing named for her mother to the gleaming towers of the city she now helped to shape, and she felt a profound sense of peace. She had started this journey in a gilded cage serving the powerful. Now she stood under the open sky, a titan in her own right, her foundation built not on wealth or revenge, but on resilience, intellect, and the unshakable knowledge of her own worth. A year later, Amelia Hayes sat at the best table in Aurelia. The restaurant, now under new ownership, had been subtly rebranded. The intimidating silence was gone, replaced by the warm buzz of conversation and soft jazz. For Amelia, returning here was a deliberate act, not of triumph over a painful memory, but of acknowledging the starting point of a journey she could have never imagined. Across from her sat Damien Blackwood, and beside him, an elder statesman of the board, Harrison Sterling, a cousin of the company's founder, and the living embodiment of its old guard. They were celebrating the one-year anniversary of Amelia's most audacious project, the Sterling Future Fund, the ethical and sustainable investment division she had built from scratch. The fund had been met with deep skepticism by Harrison and his cohort. They saw it as a feel-good publicity stunt, a departure from the aggressive, profit-at-all-costs philosophy that had made Sterling Industries a titan. Yet they couldn't argue with the results. In its first year, the fund had delivered returns that eclipsed every other division in the company. "I must admit, Amelia," Harrison said, swirling the wine in his glass, his tone a mixture of begrudging respect and lingering disbelief. "Your performance has been unexpected. But sustainable growth is a marathon, not a sprint." This focus on ethical impact, do you truly believe it has longevity beyond the current market trends? It was the same old-world skepticism she had been battling for a year, the belief that conscience and capital were mutually exclusive. Amelia placed her fork down her expression, calm and assured. "Harrison, you're thinking of ethics as a restriction. That's the old model. We treat it as a data point, a metric for stability. A company that treats its employees well has lower turnover and higher productivity. A company that invests in sustainable supply chains isn't just saving the planet, it's insulating itself from future resource scarcity and regulatory fines. A company with strong corporate governance is less likely to be brought down by a scandal like the one that conveniently took Goliath Capital off the board." She leaned forward, her passion for the subject radiating from her. "We're not sacrificing profit for principles. We're using principles to guarantee profits. We're investing in companies built to last, not companies built to be stripped and sold. What you call a trend, I call the most significant market evolution of the 21st century. We're not just riding the wave. We're building the lighthouse." Harrison was momentarily speechless, looking to Damien as if for an ally. "Well, she's certainly persuasive, Damien. A far cry from the shark you used to be investing in something so optimistic." Damien, who had been listening with a quiet smile, set his own glass down. "Harrison," he said, his voice leaving no room for argument, "let me be perfectly clear. Amelia isn't a persuasive employee. She is the architect of this company's future. Her optimism, as you call it, is now the foundational philosophy of Sterling Industries. The age of the shark is over. We're in the age of the architect, and frankly, it's infinitely more profitable." The finality in his tone was absolute. He wasn't just defending her, he was declaring a new era for his entire empire with Amelia firmly at its center. Harrison Sterling looked from Damien's unwavering face to Amelia's brilliant, confident eyes. He finally understood. This wasn't a phase. It was a permanent paradigm shift. He raised his glass. "To the architect, then," he said, a genuine smile finally breaking through. "May she continue to build." Later, after Harrison had departed, Amelia and Damien stood on the restaurant's private terrace, looking out at the city lights. "An architect," Amelia mused. "I like the sound of that." "It's what you are," Damien said, standing beside her. "You took the broken pieces of your own life and built a fortress. Then you took my company and are building it into a legacy. You don't just win, Amelia. You build." She looked at the vast, glittering expanse of New York, a city of endless stories. A year and a half ago, she had been an invisible waitress serving men like him in fear. Now she was one of the people who made the city turn, not through force or intimidation, but through a vision for a better way forward. The scars of her past were still there, but they no longer defined her. They were simply part of the foundation upon which she had built her new life. And from this high, clear vantage point, the future looked limitless. Amelia's incredible journey from a humiliated waitress to a titan of industry is a powerful reminder that we should never judge a book by its cover. Her story teaches us that a person's current circumstances do not define their potential or their worth. True strength lies not in the power you wield over others, but in the integrity and resilience you hold within yourself. She transformed an act of cruel humiliation into the catalyst for her ultimate triumph, proving that the brightest minds can be found in the most unexpected places. Her victory wasn't just about reclaiming her career. It was about rewriting her destiny on her own terms. If this story of karmic justice and unwavering spirit resonated with you, please give this video a thumbs up, share it with your friends, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more inspiring stories where the underestimated rise up to claim their victory. What part of Amelia's comeback did you find most satisfying? Let us know in the comments below.